Hello my lovelies, welcome to my little cottage by the sea, the place where I love to stitch and craft my way to a vintage inspired and sustainable lifestyle. One of my little obsessions, along with cats and sewing of course, is reading and researching about the Victorian mania for mourning. Those crazy Victorians really went to town when it came to observing mourning etiquette. And I felt inspired to make some kind of novelty Victorian inspired needle case, marrying my interest in needlecraft and the macabre. So I thought this would be a really fun and soothing little craft project, and I'd really love to share it with you today. So let's begin. I picked up these little wooden coffin boxes locally for just a couple of pounds, and the first thing I did was to create a template for the cushioning that's going to go inside. I simply drew around the base, which I'll use for cutting out my fabric a bit later. I had about a 5mm seam allowance, which I worked out by measuring the edges of the box and noting this on the template. I took a moment to check that my image was going to fit on my little coffin, so I just lined up the image underneath the coffin template, just let the light shine through so I could just check that. And I found this image online. If you just do a Google search or any kind of search, whichever search engine, for Victorian scraps, you'll find an absolute ton of free imagery that you can use. And Victorian scraps and decoupage, which is what we're actually doing here, were a huge hobby of the Victorians, and it's one I particularly love. I really love just cutting paper and sticking it, hence the pattern cutting and the copious numbers of sketchbooks, scrapbooks that I have put together over the years. I used a basic black acrylic for this, and the wood really soaked up the paint. You will probably need to do quite a few coats. Next time I do this, I'd give the boxes a light sand first, and I'd think about removing the clasps and hinges. As the wood was so light and they were so tiny, I was a bit concerned I might not be able to reassemble them, but I'll definitely try this next time to get a better overall finish. Most importantly, I put my eyeballs on so that I can actually cut out my images accurately with a sharp pair of paper scissors. I trim away the excess before proceeding to fine cutting, what I'm calling it. You might need to refine your edges with a craft knife here, so do use a cutting mat rather than the cardboard I am using. And then I use a tacky PVA glue, brush the back of the image all over, especially those edges, then carefully place and smooth down. You don't want to rip your paper. So simple yet so satisfying. pointing out here that really you should use a coat of clear varnish to seal your box. I didn't, and I just used a coat of PVA glue, which I may come to rue the day, but we shall see. And if you've never given decoupage a go, then I really suggest that you do. It's such a lovely, simple, effective and cozy craft for these long drawn out spooky evenings. And there are loads of books and resources. Just pop decoupage into a search engine and you'll find a ton of resources that will help you on your way. I have to say I'm a little bit obsessed and I just want to decoupage everything. Ghost, ghost. Not really, I wouldn't decoupage Ghost, he's already très joli. How lush are all these examples of Victorian needle cases. I found all of these in Pinterest land and dedicated space in my sketchbook as I love them so and think they're really inspiring. I wanted to recreate an opulent vintage feel just like these Victorian examples, so I used a pomegranate coloured silk dupion for one and my beloved honeymoon Liberty print for the other. Making these cushions is super easy. Cut out 4 for each box and pin the lower cushions right sides together, leaving a gap to stuff through later. On the upper cushion, cut a piece of elastic the width of the cushion, and it's probably better to do this below or above the side corner. Pin in place, then pin right sides together, also leaving a little gap. Even though I'm using these coffin shaped boxes for this process would work for any box, and I actually have my next one lined up, which is this hexagon box, and I have photocopied one of my favourite books about spiders, a vintage book about spiders, and I'm going to cut that out and put that on the top and then create some kind of inner for this, a sewing box, a little crafting box of some kind. And speaking of Victorian etiquette for mourning, I have a book suggestion, which is this one, Bellman and Black by Diane Setterfield. This is a really fabulous book and really inspiring, so well worth a place on your bookshelf. Now it's time to unshroud a ghostly Brigitte and get to the sewing. Using a 5mm seam allowance, I sewed all the way around my coffin cushions, leaving that little gap, resisting the urge to shout "pivot" at each corner. Once sewn, I snipped those corners and then turned the cushions through. Now I don't know why I didn't film this, but to stuff the cushions I just used polyfill and made sure it wasn't lumpy. Then to add a little pinch of magic, I added a couple of spoons of lavender to the filling. Moths be gone and a lovely scent upon opening your little coffin. Not the case for exhumed coffins, I'm afraid. Don't ask me how I know. Once stuffed, I stitched close the gap using a simple ladder stitch. This will be hidden by the box anyway, so it doesn't really need to be too neat. I double checked the elastic holder worked. Next time I'd like to use a better colour, so I'll keep my eyes open when I'm out at various haberdasheries. Then it was on to creating the quilted cushion. I used 3 strands of a matching embroidery thread for the pink and simple sewing thread for the other one, and they both worked perfectly well. I didn't measure or do any technical mathematicals here. I simply did what we call in the industry eyeballing. But I suppose that the spacing between all the little double stitches was about 1 centimetre across, 1 centimetre down, and I tried to keep them as evenly spaced as possible. You could of course use some kind of template or measuring tool to measure them really accurately. I spent the evening very happily stitching my coffin cushions under the full moon, watching 1941's The Wolfman, and then I also watched a rather silly British comedy called Wolf Manor and a short made at some point fairly recently called The Moors. Both are available on Amazon Prime and they really were good fun. Well worth a watch if you have a thing for werewolves. So now the cushions are done and ready to stick into the coffin boxes. I used a glue gun to do this, and please do excuse how cack-handed I am with this. I suggest gluing in the foot of the cushion first, then working up to the head, as you want your cushioning to look as even as possible. This soothing crafting project with me this evening, and that you make some kind of version yourself. I really hope you do, and please let me know. I love to hear about all your projects. I really appreciate you taking the time to spend the time with me here in my little cottage by the sea, and I'm ever grateful for all your support and your many kindnesses. I hope that only the good things are going bump in your night this spooky season. Till next time, bye.